Yo, what's good everybody? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. We have a cool little trap beat that I'm going to kind of play slash pseudo perform for you because I'm most likely going to make a lot of mistakes. But I want to talk about some of the advanced features that I found and some cool little like workflow tricks that I think will help you take your Syntakt production to the next level. Now, of course, we all know about a few things, which are parameter locking. Perhaps you know about conditional triggers, which I will touch on in a second, but maybe you didn't know about how to make your drums a little beefier, how to create an easy sample pull hack that you don't have to like go and load a bunch of different sounds, and how to just really like go from nothing to something in the most efficient way, especially when you're talking about making a full sequence or using different patterns, and then also how to like get your sidechain going. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, we'll also have some stuff on the outside of this, so what I'm running on Bitwig in order to get the sound that I am. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start this over. And we are going to kind of just bring everything in one at a time, and then I'll play with some of the synths and whatnot that I have. All right, here we go. So with that, there's a lot of cool stuff that I found within this. If you are hearing crackling and popping, it's from something that's going on with the analog heat. It might be because I'm driving it too hard or something, but I'm not really sure. Or it could just be something with Bitwig. I know someone else that has an analog heat plus, and they were also having clicks and pops within Bitwig, so I don't know. But anyways, we've got quite a wide variety of sounds, which is really cool. And I kind of just want to open this up with how this project got started in the first place. And then that will kind of take you through some of the steps of how to formulate a workflow aside from just plugging in data and notes and drums, because there's actually a little bit more to this that I think is going to really help you start writing a lot faster. So let's go ahead and jump in with what we have. The number one thing is I always start with something rhythmic, which is the hats. Now on some of these, not all of them, but you will notice that every once in a while on one of these hats or so, let me figure out where one is. Maybe it's over here. There we go. You'll see that some of these are pitched just around just a little bit. And so this will kind of give you some neat hat rolls. And that I like to do that because it makes it seem like it's not all just the same. And you can also do this with velocity if you go into the trigger here and set a parameter lock with this velocity. You can change the level as well, but I find that doing it via velocity is a little bit easier. And also, if you didn't know, you can always change the root note of this, so you can do like full semitone pitching if you don't want to use the synth, because sometimes when you just use the tune, it's automatically pitched to C, but when you tune it off, if you're playing something melodic and you go into your keyboard here, then it's going to sound off. So that's just a small workflow thing. The other thing with this is that I also set everything off, not everything, but a lot of things off just a little bit. Not every one perhaps, but sometimes I like to move everything over in some cases in order to give stuff just a little bit of swing. And the more, like the faster your tempo, the less you actually want to push your grid, which is kind of interesting. It's weird. Like if you have a slower tempo, then you can actually move your micro timing further. But if you have a faster tempo, then those micro adjustments are going to be actually larger pieces of time. So that's something to be mindful of as well. Now, what I like to do is instead of just going 4 pages and then doing something like this, doing something like this, doing something like this, what I do is I start with 1 page, I go copy, then I'll move to the next page, and then I'll go paste, and then change it, and then move to the next one, paste, and then change it, and then move to the next one, paste, and then change it. And something else that's really interesting is you can copy pages of notes from different tracks and paste them on different tracks. So you might ask, why is this important? Well, if we look at the number one thing that we have on here, which is pretty much the driving factor of this, which is the kick, you'll see that my kick pattern is not very complex. But what I have on here is a sidechain group on this, to where if we look at this via the effects tab and we go to record, you'll see that my sidechain is on kicks and snares and kicks and snares alike. And so what's really important about this is that we can copy the kick patterns and then we can just draw in where our snares are, unless if you're doing like really crazy snares, because then you might want to actually adjust what your sidechaining is doing anyways. I'll talk about how to sidechain again here in just a second if you don't know. But what we want to do is come out of this, go to track, whatever your kick is, go copy, and then whenever we go into the effects tab and we have the recorder on, we can just go paste, and that will place all of our kicks to place where the sidechain is supposed to go, because the effects block has a sequencer built into it. So on that note, what we want to do in order to sidechain stuff in the first place is we want to go function, effects, and then we want to send everything that we want to be triggered to our sidechain via the effects block here. So that should be in there, but this is the kick, this is the main snare, this is a rolling snare, and this is a clap. So you'll see that these 4 are unaffected. Everything else is being routed. And now that you have that, we can go into the amp here, and you'll see that this little guy is our envelope. Now, when you first get this, it's going to look something like this, and you don't want it to be this, because this is how long it's going to take for this to get to the attack time, weirdly enough. What you want to do is you want that to be at 0, and then you want to adjust this in such a way that is going to look more so like that. And then you can adjust the decay time of how long it's going to take, and then you can adjust the depth here for further control. Now with that, you also have an extra setting on here if you want. If you go to the synth, then you can adjust the drive. So that's kind of like a master, I don't want to say clipper because it's overdrive, but I am curious of whether or not that will clip. Maybe we can do a test or something later, but that's pretty cool. And if you're not sidechaining, then maybe you can send everything through that clipper and then just like drive it hella hard and see what happens. But I think that this is just overdrive, so in theory it should do some kind of soft clipping. So with that, I think that it's really important to start thinking about this kind of workflow and stuff, because once you start copying patterns, it's going to copy everything. And once you start changing patterns and stuff, you are going to have to go back and adjust the effects and whatnot. Now, right now, I was able to achieve pretty much everything with just one pattern. But if we want to copy something, we can go pattern 1, copy. We can go, while still holding pattern 3, and hold paste. And now this will copy the pattern indefinitely with all the steps and all the sounds and all of the stuff in between in general. And so this is great because this is a really easy way to kind of switch up how to get different sounds while maintaining a similar vibe or a similar pattern. So for example, if on pattern 3 I wanted to change, you know, whatever sound this was, which I'll talk about the transgate here in a second, but let me go ahead and turn this off real quick. Oh, also function and turning a knob will reset everything. So that's a really awesome workflow hack, especially if you're doing that pitching thing like I was doing with the synth. But if we hold this, we might want to change that for this pattern. So we can go synth and then maybe go into something different, perhaps like bits, doesn't matter. And now So we can change the sound per pattern. And if I go to a different pattern and I go back to 1, this should be the it should go back to the original sound of what it was. So now so it's a really cool way to, like, if you have a cool riff or something and you want to create different iterations of that bass line, then sometimes copying the pattern and focusing on making the pattern as complete as possible and then duplicating the pattern will give you a lot of, I guess, mileage for how to like create different parts of this in a very easy way. And there is a song mode if you want to do that. It is a little bit confusing. It's not too bad, I guess, but if you hit yes and you go into song mode and we tap this and then we go to edit, what you can do is, I think we want to go yes, and you can start a new chain, and then you can start inserting your patterns and tell it what to do from there, which is pretty cool. But yeah, that's not really all that important because I'd be recording everything out into Bitwig anyways. But if you're DAWless, then that's how you would create a different stuff. So the next thing that we have are a lot of conditional triggers. And I think that this is really cool because it adds a lot of variety to a single pattern. So if we go back to our kick channel here, let me make sure I'm on pattern 1, and then we go to our kick. If we go to some of these steps here and then we go to the trigger, you'll see that some of these are next. I think that's next is what that's supposed to be. And then I know in particular these 3 are all the same with conditional triggers. That is every 4th time this plays through, it's going to trigger these triple kicks. And so what basically we're doing is we're adding these conditions to where maybe not on the first, maybe not on the second, but the 3rd or 4th, or maybe every other time we're triggering a note. And this allows us to make our beat more complex just within a single pattern. And I like this because it means that I don't have to create a whole nother pattern just to get those triple kicks. And we can also set chance, which I have on some of the hi-hats. As you'll see here, the entire thing has a probability of 62%. But if we look at some of these other things here, I think that it's just on the 1st and the 3rd. Then some of these have different chances alike that, I guess most of these are 33. That one's just conditional, 75, 59, and whatnot. So now this has a specific chance of playing. And the reason why that's cool is because it's not something that's like too in your face. It's something that's a little bit more subtle, but still provides rhythmic variation so that way your loop doesn't get boring. And I like doing that if you do it with taste, because you know what I'm saying, you can like get a lot out of it. And that way it's like always unique in a small way, I guess. So the next thing that I want to talk about is some of the cool volume shaping that you can do. And with this, you'll see that most of my performance stuff has been through changing the parameters on this. So I've already talked about this, but if you hit sync and function, if you hit function and then turn a knob, then you can change stuff by an octave. And that's really cool because that's a very common thing that we do in my kind of music, to where everything just kind of shifts up. And I like doing that because it's kind of like here's the same idea, but now here it is, but a little bit different. And then you can kind of go and perform some of these different settings alike while you're playing live. The other thing is that you can set different filter types or movement over time. And if you hold record and play at the same time, you can actually record automation to where it's going to do whatever like pattern or whatever movement you actually perform. Now, I think that something that's really big and really important is that the LFO section for your tracks are like super awesome, and they really give you an extra like sense of sound shaping, because by default we only have like 8 different things, but this allows us to change things over time, which is really powerful. So to make a transgate, what I did was I opened up the volume on the amp right here, and then I was toggling this on and off by setting function, and then moving this either up or moving it down with just a square wave, and this will create a transgate. Let's go ahead and bring that back up. You want to set this mode here to trigger. Let's go ahead and show you that one. This says trigger. I know that this is a little bit blurry. Sorry, it's my iPhone and it's a little bit hard to see what's going on. But it's really cool because you can, set different transgates on here, and then you can also LFO a different LFO. And the way that you want to do that is you would set your destination or set your main thing, say your transgate on this one first, and then you would do it, my bad. You would do it on LFO1, and then on LFO2, you can actually modulate the time of LFO1. So if I go to the speed here, and I hit this, and I set the depth all the way up, then what's going to happen is it's going to play different timings of this transgate. So let's go ahead and move this downward so that way it goes a little bit slower, but let's see what that does now. And then I think that I actually didn't set this to the right one. We need this to go to LFO1 speed here and hit yes. There we go. But as you can tell, we're getting like different patterns and different rhythms when we're moving through this. Now, the reason why we're getting a dotted rhythm on that is because we're actually getting a delay on here. So you can change an LFO with a delay if you want to, but if I were to just go into the filter here and open this up, and then go into the amp and maybe set this all the way up as well. Then you'll see that this is kind of playing back rhythmically in different ways, and I like that. It's really cool. And you can also do this with like noise and stuff. You can also do it to make glitches and whatnot that I think are, you know, you can definitely like use these transgates to create some really interesting things. And I feel like that's a really deep dive into like how to get more out of this box, especially if you're thinking about exporting and stuff, because this is actually a trick that I use outside on like phase plant or like random resamples and stuff, where I'll create a transgate and then try to transient shape those into other things. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about how to make your snares and your kicks hit a little bit harder as well. Snares in particular, so if I have a snare right here, this one that I'm using on this track isn't all that important, but it's still going to apply. One trick that I have been using for a long time, courtesy of learning this from all the guys that I've been studying under, Chi and Cage and Zane, is that, and this is nothing new, but what you can do, or what I used to do, was use a resonance point on the fundamental and make it go up and down super fast, so that way we're pushing the fundamental up. So let's go ahead and figure out what frequency that is. So obviously that's a little bit much, but what we can do on this is we can actually go to the destination and go into the filter resonance, and we can move this over here this way to set an exponential envelope on this, and then we want to move this all the way over to the trigger mode, or actually just once, or 1. And now whenever we modulate this, versus so when you send this through and then you get into your drive on this and you're doing all that other stuff, you can actually get into some, you know, a lot bigger transients. And if you want to do this with a kick, you would do the same thing, but instead of doing a high pass filter, you would probably do like a bump, or if you want to keep the high end of whatever it is that you're doing, then you might want to use just a peak. So that would work as well. So we can figure out where that fundamental is. And you don't need to go up all the way, but you can use this in order to bump and get just a little bit more transient out of that in the first place. And again, just set that to an LFO, and that works really well. So the next thing that I want to talk about is your sample pool, because if you are in a sequencer, you know, let's say like I'm like, oh, all right, this is a really cool 808 or whatever. One thing that is a really good habit to practice whenever you're doing stuff is probably make dedicated sessions to where you're just making sounds. And then forget about it. But we want to save this sound, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to sound, and then I'm going to go to save sound. I'm going to hit yes, and then we'll save it here, and then we'll call this let's go function and just move this over to 8. Where's that 0 at? Oh, 8. We'll go back to this one, go space, and then we'll just type in T, U, T, 808 tut, and then we'll go yes. And then we can save this just as a base, wherever that is, and hit save. So now within this, if we go back into here and we go into our sounds, we can actually go into our sound manager here and upload presets and stuff. But what I would recommend, as opposed to like, you know, going and saving all these presets or whatever, is whenever you open up a new track, just save whatever it is that you've made and then load that into your sample pool. And the reason why is because, like, I know that some tracks or whatever have, you know, specific, you know, modulation or specific delay settings or specific, you know, LFOs and stuff. But for the general means of like changing out drum sounds or changing and swapping things in the first place, in my opinion, I think that going to the sound manager and having a bunch of different, let's go yes, and then pulling up a bunch of different sounds in the first place of scrolling through all this stuff is really tedious to kind of jump through. So my recommendation is you can either, you know, save individual sounds, or you can just create a default bank of stuff and just be like kick, snare, hat, percussion, just all within your preset folder like this, and just have the main 12 of, you know, 8 digital, 8 analog tracks, and load those into your sample pool. So that way, whenever you have something, let's just go like, you know, yes, 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 whatever, right? So whenever you have something like that and you tap this and go into copy to, we're going to go yes, into sound pool, you don't have to scroll through all these different sounds in which to replace with, because you're probably going to want to change them anyways. So if I've got something like this and I go no, and then let's say I go into my sequencer and then I want to change this one and go into that or whatever, I don't have to like be like, what is all this? I can just be like different 808 or different, you know, do something like this. So let's go ahead and solo that. Okay, so there was one different sound in there, and that's kind of what we're looking for. But I think that it's just a more efficient way to work, and it also kind of saves you the time of having to go through that sample manager or that sound manager and like upload all of these tracks individually into the pool and then figure out how to get into, you know, your project. Something else that you can do as well is perhaps save a template and use that template with all the sounds that you like before you even start doing that. But I don't really, you know, there's not really one or other that I think is better. I just think that the sound pool is really cool. It's just really annoying to utilize and try to, how do you say, to get up and going, because it's so much menu selections and yes and yes and yes, and like memorizing the sounds is kind of tedious as well because it's just lists, and they do have different categories or whatever, but I haven't memorized the library that's within this, and I'd rather just like tweak my own sounds anyways. So the main point of all of this with getting into stuff is to make sure that you are trying to make your initial first pattern as interesting as possible before you move on, because if you have anything that's like sidechaining, or you have, you know, different chances and triggers and stuff, then that's a lot easier to copy over as opposed to having to redo it or redo the entire thing per switching the pattern. But when it comes into, you know, writing different melodies and stuff, something that I find to be interesting is that you can write a melody and then change it into a chord. So I haven't really done that on this other than the chord that we have here. It's just kind of a simple means to an end. It's not really all that interesting or whatever, but it's kind of funny. So with this though, sometimes if you try to just write in chords, it's like really difficult. And so something that you can do is to just take a different melody, maybe something like this, and we can hit this while we go and type in our chords or whatever via going this way. So you can play different chords while this is recording by hitting record and play at the same time. But once you have this, then once you have this different, once you have just like a melody line or whatever, you can go back and change this into chords. And I think that will be a much easier way to find your chord progressions as opposed to trying to sit here with a chord thing. via kind of like this and being like, okay, here we go, let's do this thing. And then, you know what I mean, just swapping through these different chords or whatever and trying to make it, you know, like the proper progression as a whole. If the melody is good, then adding notes on top of it is going to sound good. But if you're just trying to start with writing random chords, then a lot of times it sounds cheesy. And for this one in particular, one other thing that I like to do a lot is to use the LFO to change the waveform. So that way this is constantly doing something a little bit different and giving me a little bit of a different timbre. So we talked about how to copy patterns for sidechaining. We talked about how to use a little sound pool hack. We talked about how to make your drums a little bit bigger by using the resonance thing. We talked about making your pattern, you know, as interesting as possible to make the other aspects of writing your beat a little bit easier. The duplicate and variate, right? And then we talked about some cool little melody things when you are wanting to create chords out of this. Now that we have that though, we're actually going to come out of this and I'm going to show you what I've done in order to make this beat a little bit larger. It's really not much, and it's pretty much my basic mastering chain anyways, but I am barely even using the analog heat other than driving it a little bit. And so rather than sliding the camera over, I'm just going to pull this up for you so you can see what's going on. But the only thing that I have going is the heat on saturation and then the compressor, because the compressor is what's turning it up loud. And then I'm also driving the dirt up by quite a bit. So the compressor is kind of, I don't know, if you turn everything off, I'm sure that this is still acting, even though it's not showing any gain reduction. So let me actually see if it is doing something of the sort. Interesting. So it doesn't seem to be affecting at all, because you would notice it right here. But because of that, I guess, and maybe that's not a good thing or a good practice to do it with just a compressor anyways, we can turn the threshold up, the ratio up, the attack, the release down, and then we can just crank the gain in order to get a larger sound. And then what I tend to do is to just clip stuff. So this is clipping at 0. I'm just hard clipping it. And then on the master channel here, we're kind of doing that one more time. So I've got some parallel compression kind of going like this. And if we just kind of listen to some of this stuff again, let's go ahead and turn the hats back on. So some parallel compression that has a really low mix. Then I am clipping this again by 1 decibel and then pushing this through a hard clipper. And then all I'm doing is just leaving this on the limiter as a whole. And so with this, we can actually make this a little bit louder without crushing it, but this is a good starting point for me in order to try to, you know, find a decent middle ground. Especially when we start adding all the other elements in, it can get kind of chaotic. You can see that just adding in that little melody thing is kind of breaking the sound and kind of pushing it through a little bit too hard, but that's automatically pushing that up to like 6 decibels. So yeah, I mean, I talked about this in the other video as well, but just as a quick recap in case if you haven't seen it, because it's not a very popular video. For whatever reason, if it's time to like get into, you know, finishing this track up or whatever, and you like what's going on, then you can split the chains here and apply effects to each individual thing. If I wanted to create a neuro bass or something, I can just figure out what track my sub is playing on, which is just track 1 because it's actually a kick, and then I can actually throw the analog heat on this and throw in all my filters and stuff, change this to a respace and make a neuro bass out of this, which I'll talk about in another video. I've already covered it on stream, but it gives you a lot more flexibility to try to track and record everything out. The other thing is that if you have rolling sampler, as you can see here, this is already kind of, you know, making some cool sounds or whatever. So if you're just trying to use the Syntakt to extract different ideas from, so let's say we just want the hi-hats or whatever, we can hit play. And then I can use this to create, you know, some different interesting stuff by getting into that whole resampling idea of moving stuff. We might want to do that. I think this is in, there we go. And so we can kind of start shaping this and changing this into different, you know, timbres and whatnot, or start adding to this just by using that resampling method with whatever it is that we have playing. So even though this is a starting point and it's not that many tracks, when you start thinking about like, oh, okay, well, that's really cool, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy and play this out. Well, now what I might want to do is I might start looking at, you know, switching this up a bit and, you know, changing some stuff like this. Or maybe what I might want to do is something a lot more simple, just for the sake of demonstration. I can move this over, and then at the end of that 4 bars, I can paste this and hit reverse and stretch this out. And now I've got a cool little, right? Maybe I want to probably turn that down a little bit too, but. And so with that, you know, we can kind of create cool little changes or cool little, I guess, like variations of this stuff in order to kind of get some decent sounds out of this or whatever. So even with this hi-hat that we've got here, right? If we start taking this thing and we turn this on, we can actually get into, you know, something kind of like this and be like, okay, well, now let me listen to this real quick. But, you know, we can actually use that and maybe switch this to like repitch. And then we can actually add like extra hats on top of this. So we can also set this to kind of quantize if we want to. So then we can also add in like little inflections in here as well of, you know, stuff like this. Just cool little rolls. Maybe we might not want to repitch that though. We might just want to like pitch this like this instead. So right, it allows us to create more variations from this, and that's part of the reason why I think rolling sampler is just a joy to have in the first place. But when you really start thinking about combining a hybrid workflow with everything that the Syntakt has to offer, again, I don't really necessarily expect to make like professional music or anything with it, but I do think that it's a great composition tool, and that's kind of like how I think about using it. It's my my easel or my canvas or my sketchbook, and making myself have to use very basic sounds to create something interesting is a really big challenge that I've kind of grown to appreciate, right? Because usually I just like make the craziest sounds or whatever, and it ends up sounding like crap because I'm trying too hard and I'm focusing only on the sounds as opposed to the composition in itself. So in any case, I hope that was helpful and hope that you got some cool insight out of that. And if you have any questions about the Syntakt or working with Bitwig or how I might integrate this into an actual project, then feel free to reach out. But I had a lot of fun doing this today, and I thought that I would just share it, and hopefully you got something out of it. Or, you know, you can apply the same thing to other groove boxes or whatever it is that you got going on. So in any case, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Be sure to like the video and subscribe. Check out alckemy.com if you would like to support the channel with checking out my presets or booking a lesson or something. And I'll see you all later. Bye, everybody.